Well, we better get started, guys. We are 5 minutes in, so I'd like to welcome Blake Erbach, our evaluator for the BAS Center. Welcome, Blake. Thank you for attending. Hope you've had a good day so far.
Thank you, Robert. I'm enjoying it.
Fantastic. So this session is all about trying to figure out what is currently working in the labs and what do we need, what's not working in the labs for yourselves. So I'm here to facilitate the conversation and let's talk it out.
All right, I'll start off where I'm at. We have just pretty much completed building of a lab. And so this last semester was devoted to students putting the lab together, and it was mostly residential. And we even though we have the 6 BAS 22 controllers, and we do have the BAS View 3, and I also got a Ethernet DIN rail mounted router, and all of the cabling, and also interfaces for Mitsubishi mini splits that have been installed. So, but none of it's hooked up yet. I have 6 VAV boxes, 3 of them hot water and 3 of them heat kit. But we ran out of money last semester before we could get it ducted together. So we are still in the construction phase. So most of what I did was short bursts of learning on emulation, on the emulation software, because that's, students are able to install it on their own personal computers. And so I'm not exactly where I want to be in my curriculum yet, but we are most certainly getting there.
Fantastic. Do you have any issues with accessibility of the software? I know the SAE emulator is free from contemporary controls, but do you have any issues with students not having Windows laptops they can run it on?
So far I had a student that I thought might be a problem because he has a MacBook, but he didn't take the class. So everybody else had Windows-based machines. As far as my machine that is for the school, IT was able to install everything for me because they were the ones with the administrative rights, but they were able to get it to where all I have to do is, if I ran into expirations or anything like that where I had to have some administrative rights, I just take it on over to them and they take care of it. So far that's been pretty smooth. And I don't even have to worry about if I have technical difficulties, because I have a personal laptop that I can just pull out and get going on. So I think that being a open source software makes it very, very easy.
Fantastic. And I've got some other questions for you, but we'll switch over to Robin here.
So I've been working with the EasyIO stuff. I went down and had to Brian's workshop. Been down there twice now, and still I still don't have access to the LMS where his lessons are, but I took what I learned there and put it into a course for the first time. This was our first course in actual BAS this last semester. We did have a problem with one person having a Mac. We got some laptops that were not being used, but due to state policy, we can't go to a manual IP address on it. So we can't actually access it. It'll run the emulators, but it won't access the EasyIOs. But the main problem with our program is I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I know the theory, I know how this stuff works, but I just don't have the practical skills. So we're still struggling with that. Of course, things are shrinking a little bit, and I'm not sure how we're going to be able to, whether we're going to be able to generate basically the impetus to get this off the ground. Been working on it for about 4 years, and we're going to get a advisory committee together, and hopefully those people will be from the field and help out. But the other thing I was thinking about, and this came from the workshop we did 2 years ago with the VAV box. And I thought, and when I tried to do there was to try and scale it down. So I had a VAV box and I used some light bulbs for electric heaters, and then I put it into a pop-up hunting blind so that I could have a small box. And then I got thinking what I'd really like to do is I could make this go into like a 3x3x3 cardboard box. And if I could scale everything down, that would be great. The only thing that doesn't scale well is the flow meters. At that size, it just I haven't been able to figure out how to do that. So, but I thought if we could do that, and then everybody could do. You could have 3 or 4 of these things. They're not that expensive to build, and except for the instrumentation. And it would be fun because then they could see it all work. You could change the thermostat and see it actually work. So we'll see how that works. Like I said, this is my last semester, but hopefully I'll be able to come back in and continue to tinker with the program.
There you go. So on the 2 problems that you are experiencing, I have a couple of specific suggestions. For one, for overcoming not being able to set static IP addresses, get yourself a cheap wireless router that you can set the leased IPs on through DHCP, and then just set it within the range that can talk to the EasyIO controllers. That's exactly what I had to do at Metro for exactly the same reason. And, it actually adds a lot of freedom for the students to move around and not necessarily be tethered and have that tripping hazard.
So they were connected to the wireless router from their computers, and then the computers were hardwired to the controllers?
No, the router was hardwired to the controller and the laptop connected wirelessly to the router.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Cool.
remember you using like little dongle ones, right?
Yeah, I had some little ones by TP-Link that were battery powered job. But honestly, anyone that you can set the IP range on is a good solution. The problem with those little TP-Link ones is they've gotten a little bit expensive. Last time I was looking at them, they were like $250 a piece, which is, they're really cool. Don't get me wrong. I love them, but that's a little bit expensive for what they are.
So how would they differ? I mean, I have a bunch of wireless routers around here that I've just at home. Was there anything in specific you need to be able to set an IP address?
Right. You've got to be able to set the DHCP range
Okay.
for the router. So you'll need to be able to change its IP address to reasonably close to your EasyIO controllers, or change your EasyIO controllers to be within the pre-programmed domain for the wireless router.
Okay.
Either way can work. It's just a matter of what you've got access-wise.
Cool. I will definitely try that as soon as I can.
All right. The other solution is for your dealing with your low flow for your VAV box into the hunting blind. If you reduce your inlet duct diameter so that you can get a little bit more velocity out of it, you can use something like this, small pitot tube, and use its pressure ports to connect to the controller and measure your airflow that way.
Right. I should have thought of that. In fact, I had reduced I think I was having trouble with velocities even using 3-inch PVC. But there is 2-inch PVC and it's even cheaper. So that's a great idea. That's a great idea. And I will definitely, because if there's one thing I want to finish up before I retire, it's this little VAV box.
Yeah, I think that's a great project. And once you get it, even if you don't completely finish it, please do at least some basic documentation on it. And get it back over to us to share, because I think it's a really great goal. And I think it's a great project that I think a lot of other folks could benefit from.
Okay, I definitely will do that. I've got all the equipment left over from when we did it last 2 years ago. So
Very cool. And if I can be of any help, just shoot me a message.
I'll have to get your new email address, but I'll get it somewhere. So
I will put that in the chat right now so I don't forget it.
thank you.
Hey, Robert, I want to mark this milestone because on the first topic you were discussing about wireless networks, I want to note that I understood everything you said.
Hey, fantastic, man. That is progress. How is your partnership with CompuTrolls going?
It's been excellent. I've ordered a couple of batches of things from them. First, I ordered 6 controllers, and then I ordered the router or a switch. It was a 12-port switch, and then I ordered a couple of MSTP to Ethernet adapters, and I haven't had to call for customer support yet. But it's comforting to know that especially when, at first when I was attempting orders through the email or through their service, there was no response. But then I contacted HarperTap, and then bam, everything was good. So,
quick clarification: HarperTap is with Contemporary Controls.
right. That's why I said, didn't you say with Contemporary Controls?
No, CompuTrolls.
CompuTrolls. Oh yeah, they've offered me free training, and I have not been able to take them up on it. I've been too busy to go down there and take them up on it. But they, as part of their donation, is training me on their control setup. Now, even though I have their proprietary talking software that talks to the controller and has to have a proprietary dongle on the laptop to talk to a controller, the students can use their edit software without a license. So that's just like with Contemporary Controls. Students can use their line item drop down menu interface to set up a control strategy. But to test it, we don't have the advantage of a emulator. So to test it, they do have to save their software, send it to me, and then I use that laptop to interface it and load it onto the controller, and then they see it operate. And it's kind of an exciting thing to do, because you could have I have 6 controls, of course, just like I do with Contemporary Controls, and I erase all the software off of them, and then they're dead. They have the room sensor, and it doesn't even display temperature. It just has a light on it. And they have lights on the front of the electronic boxes I made. And then I say, okay, let's load it. And then it starts communicating to all the controllers and uploading the software that the students wrote. And then all of their controls start displaying the room temperature, and then lights start coming on as set up by the students, and they get excited when they see the lights start coming on and it starts operating. Something they wrote is operating on the machine. So it's pretty cool. So far, the only functionality I have right now is turning lights on and off, but those lights are labeled, hey, this is this piece of equipment, this is that piece of equipment. But it still they still get a little bit excited about it because they were able to see some form of software operate.
That's fantastic. And hey, you got to start somewhere, right? The fact that students are excited about it and you're excited about it is just phenomenal. And one of the things that I really like is you took an advantage of pre-existing software the fact that they can write the programs and save them, even though they can't upload them to the controllers, but you're handling that, which also gives you maybe a little bit more in-depth level of control than letting the students do it themselves. That way you've got the opportunity to review their programs, make sure nothing's going to get broken as a result, which honestly, in some situations can be really helpful. Like Bob Clark says, there is no such thing as student proof.
Oh, absolutely. I found that out with the donated BAS 22 I got a few years ago. The student wired 120 volts to its power supply.
Yeah, that doesn't, they don't last real long that way. Though in the field, I don't think Schneider is making this controller anymore. Actually, they may still be making the controller. There is one controller at least that Schneider Electric makes or made that does use 120 volt power supply. It is kind of an oddball in the industry. Everybody else uses 24 volts because, you know, so much less restrictive, but yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Scott. Welcome.
Oh, thanks. That's good. I've got a question if it's okay to do that.
Absolutely, please.
So I've worked in a fair amount of commercial office buildings. So this is where the question for the application makes most sense, but it could be expanded. And I asked a few control company reps, and this was probably 5 or 8 years ago. You know, does your control system interface show color-coded temperature, discharge air temperatures at the ceiling terminal unit for each room, so that if it's, you know, say above 70, it's red. If it's below 70, it's blue, and maybe it could be varying shades, so that when someone does a quick visual of a whole floor plate and sees all these colors, if there was, you know, hot next to cold, that's a conflict usually. Maybe not always, but it's the reheat system's kind of awry and not working properly. And none of them said they had it. And one said, "Oh, you know, that's not on our agenda for the near future." So it seems like a good idea. And if you've seen it, let me know. If you haven't, keep asking. So maybe we get it someday.
I think that's a really interesting idea, and it brings up the topic of graphics. I will state that I know of most of our modern control head-end softwares now have the capability to provide gradient-based information. We use it very heavily on things like floor plans. Normally, it's more oriented towards room temperatures than it is discharge air, but it's easy enough to set it up on something else as well, both on a floor plan type graphic or a VAV specific graphic. So what you're asking for is definitely possible, but it does bring up a good question for Robin and Robert. Are either of you looking to do any training for your students towards the graphical end of systems, or is that beyond the realm of what you have time to teach?
There's a huge time constraint for me to be able to do that, but I would like to eventually, if I'm able to make a program that's specific towards controls, add that. But in order for me to do that, I have to learn to do it myself.
Right, always the challenge. You know, what can I do so I can teach it?
I'm in the same boat. When I taught building controls this last semester, one of the things I wanted to do was we're redoing the controls for our psychrometric chamber, and I wanted to take those pictures and set it up so that you could see all those, you know, see the temperatures and humidities at each spot, and you know, and really don't know exactly what a psychrometric chamber does. I wasn't sure how to write controls for it, but we were going to at least get it to monitor. It's got controls from Carrier or someplace early on, but they say, oh, we're going to take those all out and do something different. We've got a new, we were able to retire the steam boiler that we would use once a year to run the psychrometric chamber and then have to spend thousands of dollars to get certified and tested each year. So, and we got just a little steam Jenny that will give us enough steam for it. So I still want to know what the heck it does, but I'm sure that Mike will tell me sometime when in a way I can understand it.
Yeah, psychrometrics are not a simple topic for sure.
I thought that would be an ideal application for the graphics because they were using it, each of the individual sections, and then they could see it on the screen. And still would like to do that, but I have to learn how to do it. It's not that easy with EasyIO, from what I can tell. But
no, they didn't make it as intuitive as they could have for sure. But it would be an option for the BAS View 3 that I know that you also have.
yes, I thought about that too, and putting that in, plugging that in would be an option. Again, all these things I have to learn, and I've noticed that I don't learn things as fast as I used to, or as well, or at all sometimes. But guess that comes with creeping up on 70.
Yeah, it takes time to learn things, and the more we know, sometimes it's the easier. If it's something close to what we've done, sometimes it's not. But were we able to kind of successfully answer your question there, Scott?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not quite sure who all the audience is here, but I think the more people are aware of it and can, voice their interest in something like this, if they're interested to control company reps, that'd be great.
There you go. And if you have a specific project that you're working on this goal for, Scott, please, my email is in the chat. Please go ahead and reach out to me on it.
Well, I think big. So my goal is to have every building out there with this capability.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, shoot me an email. Let's talk about it a little bit more in a little bit different forum.
Sure.
Robert, I sent you an email, then all it was to incorporate your email into my Outlook memory. So
I know how that goes. So I had a question for Robin. You said that you had gone down and visited Brian's trainings twice now. Are you using his trainers, and does he have a trainer that includes a programmable controller now?
Yes, he does. And well, we were there together for one of those trainings, and it was I went to another one that was more of a lesson plan kind of approach, I believe, and I was able to take the hike up Stone Mountain instead of staying around and figuring out how we blew up the controller. That's my claim to fame, is I've blown up 2 FS20s with on the same project of doing the 4 to 20 milliamp loops. But anyway, so I am using the trainers. I still fall in love with the VAV box as a more practical thing, because sure, I can turn on I can hook up a thermistor, and we can change the temperature on the thermistor with our fingers and make it move the actuator, the actuator motor, and things like that. We can look at and see how it's lags, and see the output from the actuator motor compared to the input, so that you can see it. And I use a ramp for that, and you can see it go back and forth. I don't know. The students think it was kind of cool to turn on lights, and do that, but I don't think that's going to capture their imagination like seeing something like a VAV box actually working and seeing it emulate what's going to happen in the real world. So I like all those pieces, but I'd rather see them set up on a larger board. And I know why he put them into those Pelican cases, so we could move them around. But I'm just not sure that that's, you know, his other operations are wall-based. You know, he's got one wall-based controls and then a set of, then the hydronic system, which is essentially three-dimensional. And those make a little more sense. It's hard to say because again, the program isn't up and running and really, you know, the students don't know anything going into it, and they learn something, and whether it's useful or not is always the question.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think students really like to see stuff move and happen. And more than just seeing it move and happen, seeing it have an effect. And that's part of what I like about your pop-up hunting blind VAV project is because you have a space where you're controlling temperature. I think that's a really sweet setup because you get to see the actual effect.
And just the other day, I was able to actually look at what other people did on the project, because there were, well, I think 4 people or 5 groups that submitted a plan that ran on the EasyIO, and I was able to load one of them into the emulator and take a look at it. I didn't have a chance to really dive in. I do know that mine was, I think, 8 pages or 5 separate pages, and it went into a little more detail than I think others did. I had safety cutouts and things I can't even remember, but because I kind of build things sort of on the fly instead of from a plan, I would develop all these fun things. One of the things that I did in the EasyIO emulator was I would put in a connection box so I could connect it to the actual inputs and outputs, or I could connect it to a ramp, or I could connect it to some sort of other emulator that emulated the inputs and then showed the outputs, and I did that. And then I had so there was an input side, there was an output side, and then there was a kind of a wiring box where I could wire the inputs or or some sort of emulator and just change the wiring on it, on that wire diagram.
Conveniently and easily. I
Yeah.
understand. I think that's a great way. I actually do something very similar when I'm programming in the field. Mine is more for code encapsulation purposes. I have a folder that just has my inputs. I have a folder that just has my outputs. And then I have different folders for different chunks of code. So for controlling a hot water valve, I have one chunk of code. I have a separate chunk for controlling the damper actuator, things like that.
Yeah, I had one for cooling and one for heating and one
Very
for
nice.
ventilation and things like that. It was kind of fun. I mean, I started doing controls in AppleSoft Basic, so this is it's different now.
A little bit.
So
If you are there, Harpartap, I actually have a question for you.
I'm here.
Fantastic. One of the questions that we got during your presentation was projects that were upcoming. And I was wondering, do you folks have any plans for doing a VAV controller?
Well, we have talked about it a few times. So, you know, we have some other projects that we want to wrap up first that's on our radar, but I don't know if it'll happen, you know, soon. Probably if we look at it, it will be towards the end of the year, not before that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And the reason I ask that is because there really are very few Sedona-based options for VAV controllers. Obviously, as Robin was talking about, we have the one from EasyIO, but with them being a Johnson company now, accessibility on that and long-term stability of it as a system to rely on to train on in a lab is kind of questionable. Whereas you folks have a great track record and things are just always look fantastic when we look over at your stuff. So
okay, yeah, that's good to know. Okay, you know, it's on our radar, but like I said, you know, we want to wrap up a few other projects first and then look at it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Anything anybody else wants to talk about? Or Partap, did you have any questions for these guys? Mr. McNabb over here does have 6 of your controllers in the lab. Mr. McClellan has a few controllers, though time is a little bit limited for him. So, but did you have any
Okay.
questions for them?
Well, to be totally honest, yeah, I didn't get to watch any of the presentations. We have AHR in, 2.5 weeks, and I gotta ship stuff Monday. So I'm gonna be coming into the office tomorrow as well. So my plan is to watch the recordings, eventually. So, but just in general, I hear more and more about, okay, it's IP networks, okay. And I understand people have MSTP. Okay, they're not gonna throw away their MSTP controllers. Distance wise, again, you're not gonna get the distance on IP that you get with, MSTP. So, like for your curriculum, like what are you gonna focus on to say, okay, kids need to understand, MSTP, IP, like if I were to say, plan for my future and say, okay, this is what the colleges are looking for. So what would be your feedback, from everyone to say, okay, like you mentioned VAB, okay, that's good to know. But in general, controllers, IP networks, switches, routers, like what's the focus moving forward? So give me like a 3-year crystal ball starting today.
Rob, you want to take that one first?
Well, since we're in the process of learning how to present curriculum, and what I did purchase from you was 6 22 controllers, a switch, I believe it was a 12-port switch, 2 MSTP adapters to Ethernet.
Okay.
And on top of that, MSTP communicators for 3 Mitsubishi mini split units that are dispersed throughout my building. That's partially a living lab. We had to replace the Mitsubishi server room air conditioner, and that was done by students, and that was part of their living lab exercise. And now we plan on running a connection from our lab to the server room, to that air conditioner, so that students can see its performance and data log its performance and look at. So the element, including using that BAS 3 that we plan, and we haven't been successful with it yet, but we plan to do it as soon as and this is going to be the first semester where we try to preliminary attempt this, is to add the data analysis, data acquisition and analysis element to a BAS system.
Okay.
So that, and we're going to keep it very simple at first. Our data training is going to just be, okay, when was the unit on? When was the unit off? And can you get that data, and what do we do with that data? And with our simulated systems, we're just turning a light on and off, but now we'll be able to acquire the data of when was the light on, when was the light off. When was our controller sending a command to that unit? When was it? And then when we get all of our ductwork set up, then I'm looking at doing the data acquisition for analog inputs such as airflow and temperature. But in the right now we're at the input output discretes, and that's going to be what we're going to be focused on, is acquiring the data, communicating, and just sending back and forth those discrete input and outputs.
Okay.
And so you're using almost exclusively at this point IP networks.
Yes, sir. And it's separate. It's completely separate from the campus network. And that just simplifies things for us.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Robin?
Well, I since I don't have much practical experience, and most of my knowledge is in policy and where things are going, and I think back to when I went to my first BEST annual institute, and we were sitting there and people were talking about not being able to get to be able to collect enough data, temperature data, because of the bandwidth problem. And I'm sitting there going, Jesus, there are people watching cat videos here, and you can't get three temperature, a temperature data per minute on a room. I gotta believe that until we give up on MSTP and go to IP where we have some real bandwidth, that's going to be a problem. And contemporary controls is working, I know, on AI approaches to things, which I think are going to be the future of it. But even with the ASHRAE 38 that those controls 36 is going to be, we're going to need that kind of bandwidth to do the kind of controlling that we need to do to make buildings efficient. I mean, we heard this in this session, we heard about people saying, we go in there and we can improve the efficiency of the system by 30–40% just by redoing the control structure. And I'm thinking, when I came to this from doing more computer work, and I did most of my controls work like I said, on an Apple II Plus. But I thought, we're really at, 1990s to 2000s level of programming. I mean, I'm working in Sedona, and I'm limited to 7 characters for a very somebody. So we've got to have some sort of quantum leap away from where we are now. We have to get something. We need to change to a much finer grain system. We need to be able to manage a lot more inputs and analyze them in much more sophisticated ways to have things work properly and efficiently. And if we're talking about saying, 10, we could probably do this in commercial buildings if we were to retrofit just the control structures for commercial buildings. We could save thousands. I mean, we could save tens of percent. But we can't do it on MSTP. I mean, I use MSTP on one of the control systems that I wrote for my own home heating system and collect data. But I think it's great because it runs so far. But it's gotta, it's gotta get turned into something. It can't be the backbones anymore. We can't be limited by that kind of bandwidth. We're going to need a lot more data. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Right. You mentioned the word like backbone. So I agree, like the backbones, yes, they have to be IP. There's no way around that. But like some of the peripheral devices, like if you look at the cost, traditionally, you look at the industrial automation industry. Okay, those guys are always at the bleeding edge, right? Building automation is more, hey, what's my cost? Okay, you see some of the controllers, they don't even have a metal case. There's a reason for that. They want to, it's $5 cheaper than, everybody else. So I think that's where most of the issues on the BACnet side come in, again, memory constraints, all that stuff. And then with IP, pushing more towards IPS, Ethernet controller, you have the IP stack. So all those are going to raise cost. So the industry as a whole has to accept that, your next controller is not going to be the same price. It's going to be expensive if you want security, right? As a manufacturer, I know if I have to keep updating the stack, there are always going to be vulnerabilities. Okay, I got to keep my software updated. So I need space to do all that. So I can't start with, say, I'm 80% full today. Okay, like the next batch may take, 30% more memory. So I got to be ready for that. So,
Right.
There are some other decisions like long term. If you say, that need to be made, then you got to be willing to pay, I think, some additional money on the control side.
Part of the problem is that so much of capital project is independent and doesn't consider operational costs and operational savings.
Mm-hmm.
I watched a video on a passive house standard for commercial building in Alberta that was oriented north and south. And they built it to passive house standards, not just net zero, but passive house standards. And those kinds of controls and the kinds of savings, and they went over that, the total cost of ownership, and over 25 years was cheaper than building a conventional building and cheaping out on the controls. I mean, this is how we ended up with, in Messina, where there was municipal power from the power dam on the St. Lawrence. Everybody in Messina, all the new houses that got built in Messina when they were building the dam are all electric resistance heat because it was all cheap. You could in 1960, it cost you about $120 to put in all your baseboard heating. But, it's penny wise and pound foolish. So I'm not sure what you do about that. You're following the industry and you're following the demands, but there's just to make that next step, we got to do something a little different. That's all I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really interesting question as to what we have to teach. Largely, I agree with Robin as that moving forward, IP is going to be the predominant networking topology that we're going to deal with. I know we have at least one manufacturer out there that is kind of herring off on their own path and is offering a T1L option, which is wire Ethernet, which is really kind of an interesting idea. Building, I've been around long enough that thin Ethernet is still something that's still in my memory banks, but I think it's interesting that we're reviving some of those standards, but largely that IP is the way to go forward. But to your point, kind of your smart end devices still use a lot of two-wire communication. And as much as I would love to throw MSTP out the door because, it is a challenge to troubleshoot, cost-wise, it is very effective to implement. It's very low cost. It is reliable when it's set up properly. And there is just a massive quantity of it out there. Between BACnet MSTP and LAN here in the US, in our installed building base, it vastly outnumbers the amount of IP controllers we have at a ratio that has to be somewhere north of 100 to 1. So it is something that I think we do still have to teach on because it's not going away in the near future. 10 years, 20 years down the road, I think we'll probably have gotten to the point where we're not installing it new, at least, and actively retrofitting it out. But I still think there's going to be a lot of it in place that's going to be being used. So while I think most of our efforts should focus towards IP, in the cases where you have time to be able to deal with it, in the case of having a full program, for example, I think it's worth some time at least to talk about MSTP. And, I suppose if you have to, you could talk about LAN as well. But
So if I recall, the MSTP that I have in my house, I just figured it out reading a book. It wasn't like IP where there's a lot to it. It seems like teaching IP is a lot more cumbersome. Am I wrong? It just seems to me that MSTP is pretty simple compared to IP.
it from my experience teaching it to people and dealing with it, yes, it is a simpler one to understand because you are much more limited on your addressing schemes. It's something you can really demonstrate pretty easily with hands-on exercises. Using a string around the room and there's a washer on the string that the only person who gets to talk is the person with the washer. So you got to pass it on down as you finish talking, that kind of thing.
I used to work on token ring networks. That's how old I am. But so I mean, it doesn't, it seems like we should continue to teach it, but make sure that we don't, that it doesn't impinge on the IP. I mean, the argument of that we have all this installed base was what they used. I mean, we're still using, there's still places that have pneumatic controllers that have been integrated in. And I think there's a way to do that and to phase those things out. But I am surprised though to hear that the cost of IP infrastructure is so much more than MSTP. It seems to me that so much of because it's used so much in computers that the routers and switches are fairly inexpensive. Now maybe we can't use the cheap off the shelf stuff that that I'm buying. I buy switches for $20 a piece and use them, and they seem to work fine. But maybe there's something that we can't do with that you need something better for controls. Just don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. We're so far behind that I can't even imagine how we're going to get to the other side of it. That's the challenge for me.
It is an uphill battle for sure.
And I've got a
Go ahead, Scott.
related question. I know I'm an ASHRAE member. I know that ASHRAE developed BACnet so it would communicate as much as possible with all devices. So is ASHRAE aware of this problem, and are they working to get it to be more IP? Their communication protocol to be more IP oriented than BACnet than MSTP?
So BACnet itself has specifications specifically for MSTP, Ethernet, and IP networks, 3 different implementations and layers. I do believe that BACnet SC, the Secure Connect, which is recently published and a lot of the manufacturers are working on implementations for now, does still maintain the BACnet MSTP portion of that guide. So it's really much more up to what the manufacturers are going to do. And it is absolutely a decision, like Harpartap had mentioned. It's a lot of cost analysis that goes into it. The cost of the manufacture of the systems, the cost to install the systems, the end cost to the customer. To Robin's point, yes, more data and being able to plan for needing more data access is exceptionally important. And as you, I'm sure, have seen, Scott, from the engineering side, the budgetary discussions around things like, especially building control systems, or BAS systems, the budget that they give on any given project for controls is this big. And you look at the IT budget for the same building and it's this big. And the furniture budget is this big. And, yes, those are ongoing costs and infrastructure items, but.
So is one of the bigger hurdles that if you use IP, you have to go through the IT department in the building, and you have to be connected to the whole system and be more secure?
Security is a huge one, and the answer is yes and no, because it depends on how you choose to implement the system. It can be done so that the system is, you can set up a control system in a building to be a completely separate network. Whether you're running MSTP or IP, you can have it as a completely separated, isolated, air-gapped, whatever term you prefer to use, network, which does deal with a huge quantity of the security concerns. But it then runs into issues of remote access when people aren't in the buildings and being able to send out alarms and things. Now, Contemporary Controls does offer some solutions for that, which are some really cool cellular network routers, so that you can have that completely independent network and keep it off of IT's side. The next step up, of course, is to have an independent building controls network with one touch point to the IT network, for remote access, for sending alarms, things like that. And then you can have a much more integrated system, which most IT departments kind of fight against, because you increase their costs or can increase their costs and their liability significantly, where you have multiple ports on their system and multiple touch points. So it really is one of those design discussions that has to happen.
Great.
And then even on the traffic side, right, BACnet uses a lot of broadcasts, so IT folks don't prefer that. You send who is, and then everyone says I am, and those are all broadcast packets, right? So you see a lot of chatter. So either you have to have VLANs, if you are using the same stuff, people still say, okay, I can use the same Ethernet wire, but I'm gonna put it on a separate VLAN. So, and then talking about the stuff you mentioned, BACnet SC, that's going to be more IP centric, because you do have some other requirements, like each and every device. Like you go to a website right now, right? It identifies you go to a bank. It has a little lock in your browser, so you are going to your bank, right? No one's gonna impersonate that. So you have a security certificate or a SSL certificate. So all the BACnet SC devices have to have a security certificate. And someone has to, again, manage that infrastructure to say, okay, this device is now authorized and he is a security certificate for that device. And there's a expiration date for those certificates, right? If you go to a website, you go to VeriSign, and it's probably, like about, say, $200 for getting a certificate on your website, right? So, but you cannot have 1,000 controllers and say, okay, I'm going to pay 200,000 to VeriSign. So you got to have your own infrastructure and how you're going to maintain your keys and certificates. Okay, so we were saying, okay, it's IP networks are hard. Now this is, IP networks plus security aspect on the BACnet SC side. Again, those certificates will expire. So someone has to make sure you update those before they are expired, right? Otherwise, you won't be able to reach the device or have some mechanism to be able to reach them. So again, BACnet SC will add security, but it's gonna add more work on the maintenance side, and someone has to make sure your devices are always kept up to date. And again, additional security stack that has to be kept up to date. Any bugs they find. So that's going to be an issue with BACnet SC.
Yeah.
And that was what happened recently with, in the last 10 years, 15 years with home computers and all the Internet of Things. All these things have to have security. And it is, I hear you, feel your pain. You're a controls company. You don't want to be a security company. At the same time, it is important, and it's going to be necessary. It's just like when we went from horse and buggy to cars, there were a whole new set of security and safety issues that didn't get addressed very well, and then eventually they did. And this will here too. I think that the key is having people understand the benefit, and making sure that the control systems provide significant benefits. And that really comes down to the sequence of operations and how quickly you can control things. And I'm,
And colored graphics.
be great. But what would be even greater is if we didn't have to see it, if it all got managed by in AI in a way that worked. Not that AI is going to be the be all and end all, but it's going to make a huge difference in terms of the efficiency, because it's going to be able to look at things that we never thought would have any impact on an outcome that actually do. And taking a look at those kinds of things is going to be, to me, that's the future of what's going on. And I'm a little frustrated that I'm retiring. And that at 70 years old, I'm really not going to see, probably in terms of this industry, the benefits of that. But I think it's coming, and Computrols is I know doing it. I got some work on that, and that's the one piece that I've seen. So anyway,
we do need to wrap it up. I apologize. This has been a great discussion. Thank you all for coming. Hartap, Scott, thank you for coming in from the industry side. Robin, thank you for bringing in from the educational perspective. Blake, I hope you got some useful information from observing us. But now we should all break out and head for the final closeout comments.
thanks,
Thank
Rob.
you.
Great job.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.